as well. Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm going to be talking about ways of knowing, philosophy and psychology. I will begin by saying what everybody knows to be patently obvious is that I am not an expert in any way in psychology and know very little about it. So the topic that I'm going to be talking about today is mostly going to be on knowledge and knowing and that sort of thing. And the reason why I'm talking is to talk about how psychology is related to our ways of knowing, and in particular with regard to significant and important questions about who we are and what's true and what's important and how we're supposed to think about those sorts of things like that. So if I make a blunder, which I am certain to make with regard to psychology, I hope somebody who is more knowledgeable will correct me, and I would appreciate that. I'm also not really going to be focusing on, counseling psychology. I'm going to be focusing mostly on sort of psychological science or the science of psychology and how you come to know things through psychology. So people who are doing studies and research and all that kind of stuff like that, that's what I'm talking about. I think that some of the things that I have to say overlap somewhat with counseling, but that's not really the focus of what it is that I'm talking about tonight. Okay, so introduction. So what I want to talk about is like some of the primary questions, things like what is human nature, who are we, what is true, what is our relationship to God, things like that. These are the kinds of questions that people have always asked. Rightfully, in every age, and the answers have differed significantly. You're going to get a very different answer from the polytheists than you will from the medieval period, than you will from the Enlightenment, and so on and so forth. There's been a lot of different answers to these questions. And I think that one of the big reasons for the changes in the answers, besides just sort of changes in worldview, is the way people come to knowledge. What is the source of knowledge? Where do you look for your answers? What sort of place are you going to rely on to give answers? So for instance, obviously, in the early periods, polytheism and Middle Ages, heaven was the place that you were going to get your answers. I mean, you look to the gods or God to find out what is true about human nature. You want to know what is man? Let's find out what does heaven say. Sort of more recent times or Greek times, people would look to philosophy. They're not looking to the gods. We're going to figure it out ourselves. We're going to look at human nature and do some philosophical thinking and try and figure that out. And then more recently with, say, somebody like Darwin, I would say that a lot of people are saying, what is human nature? We're going to ask that question. We're going to answer that with biology, right? What is a human? We're going to study the biology of a human, and once we've answered the question of what our biology is, we'll know what a human being is, that kind of thing. I think, I may be wrong on this, you guys can tell me what you think, but I think that there's a sense in which all three of these particular avenues of knowing are not as popular, or that's not the word I'm looking for. They are not as reliable. That's the word I'm looking for. People are looking for other ways of answering those questions. If you look at theology or Christianity or something like that, by and large, our culture is wondering whether or not Christianity is true. Are the answers that they give about what is a human being true? There's a lot of debate within Christianity and outside of Christianity, and can they really answer the question of what is a human? Philosophy, I mean, everybody looks up to philosophy and says, well, you got a million different philosophies and they all give different answers. How can you possibly trust those guys? And biology is a science. People still like biology, but there's a sense in which it leaves us cold. We're not just biological machines. There's something more to us. There's a spirit to us. And I think people are recognizing that they're waking up to the fact that just the pure scientific biological answer is not satisfactory too. So where are people looking? And my contention is that people are starting to look towards psychological science to answer some of these questions. Who am I? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. That's my feel. That's the thing that I'm picking up as I talk with people and as I think about things and I read stuff. It's just a sense that I get. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm saying it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that's what's happening, I think. So here's my outline. I'm going to talk about the big questions. We always talk about big questions at Gutenberg. We're going to talk about popularity of psychology. I'm going to talk a little bit about psychological knowledge, applying psychological knowledge to the big questions. Then I'm going to talk about scientific knowledge. Then I'm going to talk about abduction. That is not like when you go in and you steal somebody's baby and take it away. It's a way of knowing, kind of like deduction or induction, abduction, that kind of a thing. Tacit knowledge, one of my favorite topics. I always talk about tacit knowledge whenever I'm doing epistemology, and then conclusions that I'm going to draw. So hopefully we'll get through all of those various topics. So we'll start with the big questions. What are the big questions? What does it mean to be moral? What is the nature of man? What is religion? What is the purpose of man? These are the sorts of questions that we're talking about. And I am going to contend that these questions, are very, very significant, that everybody thinks about them. Everybody has answers. Sometimes people don't have really coherent, thought through answers, but everybody has some sort of way of answering these questions. And these are the questions that have always plagued mankind. You can see a lot of different people have come up with a lot of different answers in different ways. So Thomas Aquinas, like that picture. You like that picture, Thomas Aquinas? He says, man is the most complex creature who lives on the border between brutes and angels. So he's got this hierarchical picture, and there's brutes and angels, and man is right in between. Shakespeare says, what a piece of work is man. I love this quote from Hamlet. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable in action, how like an angel in apprehension, how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights me not. He was not in a happy mood when he said this. Let's just say, Hamlet. I don't know if you guys have watched Hamlet. He kind of gets down on himself. Kierkegaard, sort of the patron saint of Gutenberg, he says, man is a synthesis between the finite and the infinite. Between the finite and the infinite. You know where I got all these quotes? I got them off of a website called Why Gutenberg that some people put together some years ago. And the website's gone, but I found them all on there. I thought, those are really cool quotes. I'm going to use them. So I admit, I steal things all the time. All right, so Darwin, man with all his noble qualities still bears in his bodily frame the indelible stamp of his lowly origin. And Dostoevsky, one of our favorite writers around here, man is a mystery. I occupy myself with this question because I want to be a man. I think those are really interesting ways of approaching the question, what is a man? We all think about it. We all try and figure these sorts of things out. And that's what I'm going to be talking about here, is not specifically about psychology or not specifically about knowledge, although that's going to be a lot of what I'm talking about, but what is the relationship between, say, psychology and answering those sorts of questions? That's the thing that I'm going to talk about. Popularity, okay. Again, I said this earlier, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like psychology is growing in our culture in interest. There are more and more people that are interested in psychology. So I thought, well, let's see if that's true. I went and I did some studies. I went and looked online. I Googled, because Google always gives you the right answer, right? Everybody knows that. And I found some sites. They said that psychology is the number 4 major in college. Okay, what are the other majors that are better than that? Things like business, career-oriented things, or engineering, or health sciences. Those are more popular. But among the liberal arts, psychology is the number 1. Okay, so you might think, why is it so number 1? Is it because of the career opportunities? I think there are a lot of career opportunities, but it's not just career opportunities. I don't think it's just career opportunities. I think people are looking to psychology because they want to know what's going on. They want to think about things. The increase in the number of majors is like 40% during that period of time. The other majors increased as well, but not as much as psychology. It's growing in popularity. I also found a really interesting article about a class in Yale. Okay, it is the most popular class at Yale ever, apparently. And it's called The Philosophy and Science of Human Nature. And what they're doing is, I think this is really interesting, they're reading the ancient philosophers and modern philosophers. They're reading all the philosophers' primary texts, and they're going through them. And after each primary text, say Aristotle on, ethics, they're talking about ethics, a lot of ethics. They'll do Aristotle's Eudaimonia Ethics, and they'll read that. And then they'll do a whole bunch of recent cognitive research in psychology, and they'll talk about whether or not, Aristotle got it right according to cognitive research in psychology, or at least compare the two of them. It's kind of like, it's this interesting mix. And I'm not exactly sure how to think about it, but there's an interesting mix between the ancient or the philosophical and the humanities kind of approach with the cognitive science. And this was just my feeling. My feeling was, in listening to those lectures, because I did listen to a number of them, my sense was that the cognitive science sort of was the thing that you were using as your way of knowing, and you're just looking at the philosophers as just sort of a springboard in some sense, that the philosophers were not really going to be able to give you the answers, and that if you got an answer from one of the philosophers, you looked at the cognitive science to find out whether they were right or not. I don't know, I may be wrong. Maybe I'm overstating the case, but that was a sensibility that I had when I was listening to those. They were interesting series of lectures. I didn't listen to all of them, but I listened to a bunch of them. So I also think psychology is really popular in culture, okay? How many of you guys have heard Jordan Peterson? Has anybody heard of Jordan Peterson? I think he's kind of popular right now. I don't know. A lot of people have heard about him. He was this guy in Toronto, a psychologist in Toronto, is a PhD, and he's in the department over there. And he got really, really famous for saying things about PC culture and things like that, and everybody was angry at him and stuff like that. But then all of a sudden he got this huge following. He has like 760,000 subscribers. I mean, that's a lot of subscribers. I don't know, 39 million YouTube views. That's a lot of YouTube views. I don't know. He's pretty popular, and he's got a book, 12 Rules for Life, which uniquely combines the hard-won truths of ancient traditions with the stunning revelations of cutting-edge scientific research. Does that sound familiar? That sounds just like what's going on in the Yale class. And what he's doing is he's reading the Bible, of all things, and he's reading the Bible. He's not trying to figure out what the Bible says. He's not really actually exegeting the Bible. What he's doing is he's sort of looking at the Bible from sort of his particular psychological framework, his particular psychological set of assumptions. I think he's kind of Jungian. I'm not sure if I know very much about Jung, but I think he's kind of Jungian, and he's kind of like looking at archetypes of Abraham and all these other sorts of things like that, which I think is interesting. Again, it's this connection that people are looking for something ancient and wise and, timeless in some sense, connected with recent cognitive science. I don't know what to make of that. There it is. I think the answer is people are looking for answers. They're seeking answers. They want to know. Religion is not quite giving people the answers these days. Philosophy is not really doing it for them. I don't think that biology is really satisfactory, and they want some answers, and so they're looking to psychology for answers. I don't know. You guys can disagree with me. That's my perspective. The mind machine. What is it? Who are we? What is it that our mind is? I mean, you could think of this from two totally different perspectives, right? One perspective is sort of more the humanistic perspective. The mind is the seat of the will. It's who we are. It's how we think about things. It's where what's all going inside of who we are as human beings. Or you could think of it more from a scientific perspective. It's kind of just this machine that's going on. There's a sense in which it's both. I don't know how you make sense of both of them, but it does bring up this distinction in the way people think about these questions, the big questions. And this is where I'm going to really rely on you guys who know more about psychology. I hope I'm getting this right, but as I was looking around, my sense is that the kinds of questions that psychological science are the kinds of questions that are asking are the kinds of questions that can be empirically verified. They're things that you can take data on, things like, what makes us tick? Why do we behave the way we do? So you can do experiments and find out what is it that's going on? Why do people do? Why do they behave the way they behave? What's happening here? And then if you're really cynical, which I think it's true that this does happen, I wouldn't recommend it, and I'm sure that most people don't like it, but how can we control people? I saw a really interesting series of documentaries. It's called The Century of the Self. Fascinating set of 4 videos on YouTube that you can watch, and it was studying the introduction of Freud's ideas through a guy named Bernays back in the early 1900s, and he used Freud's ideas to essentially create advertising, modern advertising. And then they study advertising and the use of psychology in political life and how people use psychology in order to be able to win elections and stuff like that. And it's just sort of the history of psychology and Freud's ideas coming into America and how that was used to control people in a lot of different ways, which I don't know. But what are the kinds of questions that philosophy is asking? And theology says not what makes us tick, but for what purpose do we tick, you know? And how should we behave, not why do we behave the way we do, and how should people treat people, not how can we control people. So these are the kinds of questions, you know, these are more moral, or they're tricky questions, right? These are the big kinds of questions. These are not bad questions, they're good questions, and we can answer them through psychology, but they're really different. So I think that you're kind of going at things from two different directions here. So here's some examples of how this works itself out. You guys are probably all familiar with this famous trolley problem, right? How many people have heard of the trolley problem? Yeah, you guys. The psychology people have all heard of the trolley problem. I learned about this in that series of lectures that I was listening to on the Yale series of lectures. So the idea is that you see a runaway trolley moving toward 5 tied up people lying on the main track. And there's one person on the side track. Okay, so these guys are all tied down on the tracks. I don't know. It's sort of like Boris or whatever. And you know, what was the name? It was Natasha and Boris. In Bullwinkle or something like that? Yes, exactly. So there's one person on the side track. You are standing next to a lever that controls which track. You have 2 options. Do nothing and allow the trolley to kill 5 people on the main track, or pull the lever, diverting the trolley where it will kill 1 person. Which is the most ethical option? All right. This is a really interesting question. It's an ethics question, right? And it's a psychology question. The thing is that when she was doing this in the class, there were 2 different ways that you could do it. You could do, well, what's your ethical theory, right? Come up with a whole ethical theory. So you do philosophy as to what is right, what is wrong, and try and answer the question from that perspective. And the other thing that you could do is she had a lot of people in the class, so she had them do clickers. So she could do surveys and find out, how do people answer this question? How do people answer the question? You know, what is it how do people behave in situations like that? See, so the difference is, how do we behave as opposed to what is the right ethical question? Now, I am sure that people who are doing this in psychology eventually want to get to how should we behave and that kind of a thing. So I'm not saying that they don't, but the way they approach it is by finding out information on how we actually behave, which I think so. There's a little bit of a difference. Here's another famous one that everybody's heard of. I'm picking all the super famous ones, right? You know, the Milgram. Have you guys heard of this one? This is kind of a scary one where you have participants led to believe they were assisting in an unrelated experiment when they had to administer electric shocks to a learner. So one guy presumably is in on it, and he's strapped up to a shocking machine, and he's supposed to remember stuff. And another guy is over here, and he's administering the shocks. And he's being told by a third guy saying, oh, he got the answer wrong. You need to give him a shock. So the guy would give him a shock. And then he'd do another and ask another question. Oh, you got it wrong. You got to give him a bigger shock this time. And so the series of shocks went up and up and up until the very highest was potentially a lethal shock, presumably. Of course, nothing was happening, but the guy would scream, right? You know, so it's very realistic. So the survey was, how many people believe that somebody will give them a lethal shock? And the survey said beforehand, they said only 0.1% of the people would possibly give the people a lethal shock. In fact, in the experiment, 65% did. Okay, that's a really weird, so that's information about how we actually behave, right? It's the kind of question that you can ask in psychology. How do people actually behave? And you can find out some interesting things about the behavior of people that you would not have suspected in situations like this. At least that's what Wikipedia said anyway. Another way of thinking about how you think about these questions is sort of with the brain science. You have the 3 different kinds of the brain. There's the reptilian brain and the limbic brain and the neocortex. And we can say, how is it that people behave based on whether or not the response that they're having has to do with the response from the reptilian brain or response from the limbic brain or the neocortex or something like that. And so we can see, what is it that makes us tick? How does it that we work? Those are the kinds of questions that you're asking. Now, I have to say, I think this is super ironic. But today, with Jonathan and the other seniors, we were doing a reading on Plato. Okay, it was in the Republic. And it was that section of Plato where he talks about the tripartite soul, the 3 parts of the soul. Okay, so what are Plato's 3 parts of the soul? I find this incredibly interesting. It was today. Trish was in class today too. I found it really interesting. The 3 parts is, the first part is the appetitive soul. And what does he mean by soul? He doesn't mean what we mean by soul. It's not like the ghosty thing that goes up to heaven or something. What he means is the thing that is activating you, the thing that causes you to do what you're going to do. There's the appetitive soul. What does the appetitive soul do? It tells you, it gives you interest in things like hunger and thirst and sexuality and stuff like that, which is exactly the same things that are controlled by the reptilian brain, thirst, hunger, and sexuality, right? And then there is the high-spirited part of the soul. What is it that drives you, having to do with your emotions and your motivations and stuff like that, which is exactly as the limbic brain or the paleo-mammalian part is motivation, emotions, and memory, right? And then he said the third part of the brain, or the soul, the third part of the soul is the rational soul, which was, in fact, the neo-mammalian brain. Do you guys think that's interesting? I don't know. 2,500 years ago, this guy had it pegged, and now we finally, I don't know. I don't know. That's ironic. I think that's interesting. Okay. Worlds apart. Are the kinds of ways that we go about thinking about things and the questions that we ask in philosophy and theology and the humanities, are those worlds apart from the sciences? I don't know if you guys have heard, there's this book by C.P. Snow. I don't even remember what it's called, but it's like Two Cultures or something like that, where they're talking about people in the humanities and people in the sciences, and they can't talk to each other, that there's no overlap between the two of them. They don't even speak the same language. They can't interact with each other. They don't respect each other and stuff like that. So there's a sense in which the sort of psychology and biology and physics and chemistry and the sciences over here, they're like really different than the humanities. And let's just be happy with that. Let's just have them be their separate realms and answer questions that they can answer and pursue questions that they want to pursue, and so on and so forth. So like sciences, what are they interested in? Well, there's species and cells and chemicals and all that kind of stuff, right? And they use scientific techniques and data and all that kind of stuff. Humanities are interested in all these goodies over here, right? Meaning, ethics, hope, law, society, all that kind of stuff like that, right? So maybe these are really separate, that the two don't really overlap. They have different content, they have different questions. The two of them are worlds apart. Well, I would say, generally speaking, that there is a case to be made that there are some really significant differences in approach, in questions, in answers, in subject matter as well. But I think when it comes to the big questions, like what's man, what's the nature of man, what's truth, how are we supposed to think about these things, I think that they do overlap, and I think that they overlap in a kind of a profound way. Okay, so let's think about some of the assumptions that we as a culture have, and I have these too. I think we all have them. I think it's impossible not to have these assumptions to some extent, and I think that these kinds of assumptions impact the way we think about the big questions. So for instance, science might say, we are minuscule specks in a vast universe of impersonal emptiness punctuated by absurdly dense balls of raging thermonuclear fire. I kind of waxed eloquent on that. I could have just said stars. Earth's weather, earthquakes, and ecological changes are the result of impersonal physical, chemical, and biological laws, right? And that living things are complex biochemical machines, or that our large-scale societal economic behavior is based on innate unseen human inclinations expressed in supply and demand curves. You kind of get this sense that there are these laws out there, and they are telling us how things happen, that we can use science to and it's impersonal. It's just stuff that happens. It's like it's randomness and laws and so on and so forth. And this is the backdrop. This is the backdrop that we as a culture have about the nature of the world that we live in. And I think it's impossible not to have that as a backdrop, or at least partial backdrop in how we think about things. And those kinds of background assumptions impact everybody's decisions about what is a human being. There's no way that those can't have an impact. So the sciences and the humanities are definitely overlapped in some fairly significant ways, in my opinion. Okay, so basically, I'm just repeating myself, psychological science forms a pervasive and powerful set of background assumptions that form the lenses through which we answer the big questions. So in addition to the kinds of background assumptions that I put up there in the last slide about lightning and stars and all that other kind of stuff, I think that psychology is also creating for our culture a set of background assumptions as well about who we are as human beings and how the mind works and all those sorts of things like that, that it's slowly but surely building these set of background assumptions. Now, I'm not clever enough and wise enough to be able to articulate exactly what the background assumptions are that psychology is sort of producing for us in our culture, but I think that it is. And I've given you some examples. Okay, most people don't really adhere to these very explicitly, or they don't hold them, very carefully. But these sort of are swimming around in the culture in the background, like Freud. Freud says we are controlled by parts of our subconscious that we are unaware of. I think that's part of our cultural milieu that we all believe. And I think there's truth to some of these things too. Jung, our unconscious minds can be classified into archetypes, which are determinative of how we behave and what will make us happy. I hope I got that right. I don't know if that's right. I mean, it's kind of, no. Nobody understands Jung anyway. Hallelujah. I'm off the hook on that one. B.F. Skinner was a behaviorist. He said, we are simply complex stimulus response machines, sort of like Pavlov's dog, you ring the bell and you salivate, that kind of a thing, right? And then the brain scientists, our behavior is built into our brains by evolutionary processes. How you respond is basically how your brain is built by evolution, and that's what you're going to do, that kind of a thing. So, I don't know. It seems to me like you cannot separate the big questions from the science and the psychology and the world that we live in, that those are going to have an impact on how we answer these questions as backgrounds. So there is an overlap. Okay, scientific knowledge. Finally, we're getting away from psychology into something that I kind of know a little bit about, so hopefully this will make a little bit more sense than what I've been talking about so far. Okay, how do we come to know, is scientific knowledge more reliable than philosophy? What role does experimental data play in our confidence? Okay, so I always tell my students when they're writing a paper to put their theses at the beginning of the paper. So I'm going to spill the beans and tell you what I think right here and now about scientific knowledge. And then as I'm going through the rest of the talk, you can see what it is that I'm talking about. So I have 5, I hope that's 5, did I count right? 5 different points there, right? Number 1, nearly all of our knowledge is gained through abduction. I'm going to define very clearly what abduction means a little bit further on, okay? What I would call knowledge is a set of beliefs and habits that are fully internalized in our minds and bodies. That when our knowledge is stuff that has become completely ingrained inside of us. That's what knowledge is. That's what I would say it is. That knowledge in the most important sense is tacit. And in other words, it's not something that we articulate on a normal everyday basis. The claim that scientific knowledge is more objective and less dependent on individual bias is utterly unsupportable. Now we have to define some terms here before, when I get to this section, I'm going to define my terms really carefully, but I think in the way that I'm using the words bias and objective and stuff like that, you will see, hopefully, that it doesn't make any sense to say that science is objective. I think that there is a way in which sometimes people take it that you could make the case, but in the way that I'm taking it, it doesn't make any sense to say that science is more objective and less dependent on bias. And then psychological science can and does contribute to our pursuit of the humanistic questions, but it is not somehow more reliable because it is empirical or data-driven or any of those sorts of things like that, that it has the same questions as other ways of knowing. At least that's my opinion on this sort of thing. So, okay, so I got them all. Now we're going to go through them. All right, we have 3, maybe 4 ways to come to knowledge. I put in a 4th one, which I made up, which nobody else has ever heard of and is totally ridiculous, but I put it in there anyway. So the 3 that everybody's heard of are things like induction and deduction, and I think abduction is sort of the center one, the one that is most used. And then I put in something called willduction. I don't know, that's silly, but I'll tell you what I mean later. And the reason I put it in there is a nod to Ron Julian, because he's always talking about the import and the significance of the will in making decisions and knowledge and thinking and things like that. And I think he is dead on there, to tell you the truth. Okay, deduction. Most of us have heard of what deduction is. It's what the mathematicians and the scientists are always doing. It's like following a very, very straightforward proof kind of a thing, mathematical series, like Euclidean geometry, for any of you who have done any geometry, that kind of a thing. Syllogisms are very deductive, very logical. So all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, so Socrates is mortal. It's sort of like, if you buy the first 2 premises, there's just no way that the third premise can't be right. It's kind of like, it is just so darn certain. There's just no way that you could get that wrong. So deduction, people they love deduction. It's like, if you can do it deductively, you have got it, and you are certain, and you nailed it, baby. If you can prove it with math or syllogism, something like that. My contention is that we never use deduction. Nobody ever uses deduction for anything. I don't know, maybe a few people do for a few things. The mathematicians, they use deduction, but sort of. Okay, the other one is induction. Okay, well, how many of you have proved something using logical deduction in the last year or something? I don't know, I just don't think we use it. Induction, this is the idea of going from particulars to general, right? So all of the particular objects I have observed on Earth have a tendency to fall to the center of the Earth. So if I drop my keys, they fall on the ground. And I see this, and every time it happens, they're always falling, et cetera, et cetera. So therefore, from these particular examples, we can make a general statement for everybody that therefore all objects in general have a tendency to fall towards the center of the Earth. So that's kind of the inductive process. You go from particular examples and you go, this is what scientists are using all the time, right? You do this experiment, and you find that it's true in this situation, that situation, that situation, therefore we're going to generalize. That's going to be true for all people. I mean, people who do polls, political polls, we just had an election, people who do political polls are like, well, it's true for this 1,000 people, so it's probably going to be true for the whole population. That's sort of induction, kind of an approach to thing. It doesn't always work, okay? I mean, there are limitations to deduction, which is why it's not quite as pristine as deduction. Like, for instance, I can use some really lovely induction. I can say, I'm observing this chair, and it is pointed towards the front of the room, and that chair is pointed. In fact, all of these chairs are all pointed to the front of the room. Therefore, by induction, all chairs in the universe are pointed to the front of the room. Doesn't quite work, right? Oh well. There are people that really have used a lot of induction. There's one guy, J.S. Mill. He's one of my favorite guys to hate. He's a philosopher from the middle of the 1800s, and he says everything that we know comes from induction. Even math comes from induction. It's like, you use your little coins or whatever, and you put 2 coins with 2 coins, and you get 4 coins, and then you come up with rules of arithmetic, and from there you induce laws that are true for all of arithmetic. So even math is coming from induction. I think that's hokey, but he was pretty famous. Also very rare to use induction. Okay, here's willduction. This is the one, this is my favorite, okay? This is that I come to know something because I want to believe it, okay? This one is less rare than we'd like. So it's like, I want it to be true, so I make it true. So it's sort of the Jean-Luc Picard is like make it so. That's my little meme. All right. So examples of will duction would be like, if I believe this, my friends will think I am cool and they will like me. Okay, so I believe it because of that reason. If I believe this, I will get a gold star from my teacher if I'm in kindergarten. That might be a very big motivation. If I believe this, the girl I am attracted to will date me. That one is really powerful. Okay, that's a good reason to believe. If I believe this, others will not look down on me. People won't make fun of me. If I believe this, I will advance in my career. And if I will believe this, I will make more money. Okay, this is not like induction or deduction, but we're all human, and this is how we come to know things. We come to believe things through this sort of thing. So I know this is not really one of the deductions, but I had to throw it in there as a nod to Ron Julian because I think it's important. Okay, here's where I'm going. Abduction. Okay, abduction. So this one is what we always use all the time. It's the process of coming to a conclusion based on limited or incomplete but suggestive information. You believe the explanation which is most likely. Okay, so this is what we're doing all the time, right? Everything that you do, you come to these snap conclusions all the time based on this evidence that is available to you. Some of the evidence is in your vision or something you heard or read or an idea that you've had or thoughts that you've had in the background, memories, stuff like that. All those little pieces are clues that all bring together so that you come to a conclusion and you believe that is the most likely explanation. So let me give you an example. Obviously, a jury trial. Right? How do you know whether he's guilty or innocent? You're looking at all the clues, and the prosecutor and the defendant are giving you different explanations, and you say, which one is most likely? And that's how you decide. Or an authoritative teaching. That's why I got this one here. This is Paul Revere's ride, right? How do we know that Paul Revere rode, right? Nobody has seen Paul Revere ride, right? Nobody knows that, but we have a lot of evidence, right? It was in my book when I was in school, right? It's been on a cartoon on Saturday morning, Paul Revere's ride. My mom and dad believe that Paul Revere rode. And I think that there are experts that all believe that Paul Revere did this ride. There are all these supporting pieces of information that all weave together into a tapestry that makes it seem very, very likely that Paul Revere actually rode. So I would say that we're using that kind of the most likely suggestion when we're getting authoritative information from people. We're piecing things together. Most of the time it happens so quickly and we don't even think about it. Well, my teacher said so. That's enough for me. Bam, it's done. Interpretation of speech or writing. This one's really significant, especially if, like, for instance, you're reading a complicated work like the Bible or something like that. You take all these little clues, grammar clues, context clues, all these little clues, your already existing worldview or understanding of the Bible. You're putting all these things together like a puzzle, and you're saying, which is the most likely interpretation of the scripture? Bam, that's the one that you believe, right? When you are listening to somebody who's talking to you, they say something and you're like, what the heck are they talking about, right? You have no idea. Jonathan's experienced this, right? You're in discussion, somebody says something, you go, I have no idea what they're talking about. But then maybe you hear a few more words and you remember something they said the other day, and then you think about what kind of person they are, and then you're looking at the text and you go, oh yeah, I know what they're talking about, right? So you take all these clues and you do it without thinking about it. It's all just sort of super fast, and you come up with an answer. I think science is the same way. Copernicus, he's our favorite scientist, one of our favorite scientists at Gutenberg College, and he had all the same data as Ptolemy. Ptolemy thought the Earth was the center of the solar system, and Copernicus said, you know what? Sure, it kind of works, but it fits just a little better. All the clues all sort of fit together a little better if the Earth is not the center and the sun is the center, because that makes sense of this and why the retrograde goes the way it goes and why this is happening, all those pieces, and he's putting it together like a puzzle, and he says, this fits, this works better. That's what abduction is. I think scientists are using that all the time. Recognizing something. You see a dog run past, you got this little tiny clue, but you are able to recognize that it was a dog, or you might see it from a different side. You still sort of say, just these little clues, and you say, oh, it's obviously a dog, right? Or forming a worldview, that's an important one, right? How do you form a worldview? How do you decide what's true about the universe? How do you answer these big questions? You're constantly looking at all these little clues, all these ideas, and trying to weave it together into a tapestry that makes sense. How do we make sense of how people behave and what the Bible says and science and all these other pieces? This is a very hard one that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but I think we're doing basically the same process of taking all these pieces of information and trying to weave it together into a coherent whole. And I think that this is super common. This is what we do all the time when we're thinking about things and we're coming to knowledge or believing things. Our minds seek order and coherence. We are pre-programmed to want to see coherence and order and structure and things make sense. It's when things don't make sense that we get this nagging sense inside of us that says, that just doesn't work for me, and it just makes me unhappy or uncomfortable or something like that. And that's when we sort of have to start thinking and working and trying to fit it into our paradigm or fit it into our structure of how we think about things. And if it doesn't fit, it's the piece of sand inside the oyster that turns into a pearl, right? Hopefully. Okay. Next piece is tacit knowledge, all right? By tacit knowledge, I simply mean knowledge which is sort of unspoken, which is inside of us that we are not articulating. It's the kind of knowledge that is embedded in our mind or body that we're not necessarily conscious of, and it's often hard to put into words. And so this idea I got mostly from Michael Polanyi. He's one of my favorite philosophers of science. We read him at Gutenberg. He's a great guy. Really hard to read, but very interesting. He says, this fact seems obvious enough, but it is not easy to say exactly what it means. Take an example. We know a person's face and can recognize it among 1,000, indeed among 1,000,000. Yet we usually cannot tell how we recognize a face we know. So most of this knowledge cannot be put into words. You could probably recognize somebody that you know among a huge group of people, but could you sit down and write down in a couple of paragraphs the features of this person so that somebody else could pick it up who didn't know them and read those and then look at the 1,000 people and pick them out? No way. There's no way. But we can do that because we have stuff inside of us. We have information inside of us. And it's not like little photos. I don't have a photo of a person that I know sort of embedded into like a wax tablet on my mind, like Hume said or Locke said or anything like that. We don't work like computers. You know, a computer sees a picture and then it like picks out certain points on the facial features and stuff, and then it compares to all the other faces and it runs through them like 1,000 of them and it goes, hit. I found a hit because this one matches the numbers on this one. That's not the way we do it. I don't know how we do it, but we don't do it that way. We don't like have these memories inside our minds. There's something else that's going on. I would say that tacit knowledge is active in almost all these things that we do. Like when you're playing sports, you have a tacit knowledge of, I don't know, what sport do we, soccer. I like soccer. We'll play soccer. Okay, you have a tacit knowledge of how to turn your foot out when you're kicking the ball, or when to kick it, or just how to kick it. It's somebody who's new and learning, they don't have that tacit knowledge of just how to kick a ball, and so when they kick it, it goes crazy, and it doesn't do what you're supposed to do. But if you've been doing it for a long time, you embed it in your body almost. In your body, you have the knowledge of what to do when the ball comes at you. The same thing is true of music. I'm sure Elliot could probably talk to you about, for 3 hours, about the use of tacit knowledge in playing instruments or something like that, that you have to have developed in your body and your mind all this skill in order to be able to play. But you can't say it. You can't how many hours would it take to write a tome on how to exactly to play the uilleann pipes? I don't know. I don't think... Exactly. Penmanship, writing letters. Remember when you were a kid? It was just really hard to write your freaking letters. They never came out right? But now as you're an adult and you do it all the time, it's like, boom, it just comes out. You don't have to think about it. It's just embedded in your body. There are a lot of intellectual ones too, like language. All right, we have words embedded in our minds, and we don't think about it when we're using them. It's just comes out. But we all know what the words are. When I speak, I don't have to think, well, what's the definition of the word think before I use the word think? I don't think of that. I just use it. It's there. It just comes out. recognition of sights and sounds, body language. You can recognize somebody's body language. You can't write down how you know. My wife, I say something and my wife gets a look and I go, I'm in trouble. How do I know that? There's no way I can write down on a piece of paper how I know that, but I do know that. I can just tell, right? Even using a computer program is like tacit knowledge. I mean, once you become expert at a particular program, you know what to do and where to move the mouse and how to click and how to type, and your fingers go in the right places and you know exactly what you're doing. If you bring a novice in there that doesn't have all that, and you don't have to it's not like you can write down instructions for the novice. It's become sort of embedded in you, and you know exactly how to use the program, or you know exactly what you're doing and what you're looking for and what does work and what doesn't work, or programming or anything like that. Even judging right and wrong, I think a lot of that is using tacit knowledge. That one's a little more difficult, and I think that we do spend a lot of time trying to articulate for ourselves exactly why we think something is right and wrong. But tacit knowledge is a big piece of our knowledge. Okay, so now I'm going to go through a bunch of aspects of tacit knowledge, and I'm not going to change the slide, so I'm going to spend some time here on this particular slide. I'm going to go through all of these particular aspects and features and consequences of the idea of tacit knowledge. So the first two are pair, subsidiary, and focal awareness. Let me tell you what I mean by that. This is words, again, from Michael Polanyi. So any of you who've read Michael Polanyi, you all know what I'm talking about here. But the idea here is that there is some awareness that you have which is underlying your focus. It is not in your focus. It is something that is that is underlying it, that you're not aware of, but you are still able to be sort of subsidiarily aware of it. It's like you are tacitly aware of it in some sense. So for instance, let me give you an example. If you were to be typing on your computer, right, and you're typing a memo, right, what are you thinking about? You are thinking about the meaning of the memo, right? You are aware of the meaning of the memo and maybe the people that the memo is going to and what you are trying to accomplish when you're writing the memo, and maybe how to style the words in just such a way to communicate what you're trying to communicate. You are not really thinking about where your fingers are going. You are subsidiarily aware of that. You have to be aware, because if you weren't aware, then your fingers wouldn't go in the right place. You do know where your fingers are supposed to go, but you are not focusing on that. What you're focusing on is the meaning of the memo. Right? It's the focal part is is what your mind is thinking about, and the subsidiary part is all the stuff that's happening behind the scenes that you aren't focusing on, but you're still aware of. When you're talking, you're subsidiarily aware of the words that you're using, but you're focusing on the meaning that you are trying to communicate. When you are doing riding a bike, there's a physical example that Polanyi uses. When you're riding a bike, you're not focusing on the movement of your legs up and down and exactly what your arms are doing on the handlebars in order to keep yourself up. You're focusing on where I'm going and what I'm going to do when I'm getting there, right? But you still know somehow how to move your legs and arms in such a way that you continue to bike, but you're not focusing on it. So there's a lot of subsidiary awareness. That's all embedded in that tacit knowledge. Effort. This is an interesting one to me. Some things take a lot of effort. Like when you're learning something, if you're learning, I don't know, music or algebra or something like that. If it's algebra, it's like, why do the parentheses go there or there? And are you allowed to do that? Does that work? Or if you divide by that, does that work? You're not sure exactly how to do it. So you're focusing on that particular thing, and it's hard. It takes a lot of effort. But eventually, if you become very skilled after you've done algebra for way too many years, and you got an advanced degree in physics or something stupid like that, it doesn't take any effort at all. You don't have to think about it, because it is effortless. It is because that knowledge has sort of become part of you. It is part of your tacit awareness. It is part of your tacit knowledge. And when it's in the tacit knowledge and is part of you, it doesn't take any effort at all. It's kind of like when you're watching a ballerina or something like that and you go, boy, she makes it look effortless, right? Why is that? Because she's trained herself in her body in such a way that a lot of the things that she's doing are effortless. It's like the hand goes in the right place without her having to think about it. And the fingers go in the right way without having to think about it. It just happens. It's like it is kind of effortless because she has that knowledge buried into her body and her mind as to exactly what to do and where to go and how to do it and that kind of a thing. So there is a sense in which it is. Now, if it's right on the edge of her ability, then that part is hard, but there are other pieces that are really effortless. Competency. We're just amazingly, human beings are astoundingly able to gain this kind of tacit knowledge and awareness and ability and skill in a way that is just phenomenal, it seems to me. I mean, it is really phenomenal. I mean, think about people, how skilled they can get at certain things. I mean, there are some people that are really, 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 really good computer programmers. They're just really good at it. And it's like, but they have spent a lot of time and they're just very smart, but they've spent a lot of time and they've got lots of experience and they know exactly what to do with their computer program and how to move the symbols and what to type and to make it go exactly the way they want. Some people are really, really good at hitting a baseball, like a professional baseball player. Imagine how much skill it takes to be able to tell where that stupid ball, which is moving 90 miles an hour, heading straight for you, exactly how to, all these little tiny muscles are happening in your wrists and your arms and your eyesight and, your leg is going like however it's going. And I don't know, I've never played baseball. Well, I mean, you take a corporate executive and you set him up there and how many times is he going to hit that ball? He's never going to hit the ball. There's no way he's going to hit that ball. But we are phenomenally capable of gaining these skills, both intellectual skills and physical skills, that is absolutely phenomenal. That just the levels of ability that we get, that the kind of tacit knowledge that we can embed in ourselves. So I would say we're incredibly competent in using this kind of knowledge to know things. Framework. This is an interesting one too. From everything that I've been saying, I think it must be clear that everybody who is talking, thinking, speaking, interacting, communicating, whatever it is that we're doing, building our worldview, we have within us this huge, huge amount of tacit knowledge. It forms the framework. It forms us, who we are. And it is that stuff that we use to interpret information that comes in at us. There is no way we could not use that stuff when we're interpreting information that is coming with us. Everything we see and hear and think is based on all of that tacit knowledge that we have inside us. And if we didn't have that tacit knowledge inside of us, we couldn't do anything. We'd be like a little baby, Imagine we have the tacit knowledge of English language, and we know we're really good at it because if you listen to somebody who's speaking Chinese, you can't make sense of it at all. It's just like babbling, right? But we have to have that framework, and if you don't have that framework, you can't do anything. And the framework is made up of little tiny things like how to walk or run. It's made up of huge things like what's moral and who's God and what's my purpose in life and how am I supposed to interact with people around me. It's made up of all the big things and all the small things, and they're all in there together, and there's no way that you can possibly not use that stuff, that tacit knowledge, to when you're bringing stuff in and when you're thinking about stuff. Framework is huge. Articulated beliefs. A lot of the kind of tacit knowledge that we have, we articulate. If somebody asks you a question about something and you can give an answer, then that's articulated knowledge. So that there is a bit of a difference. You may not be able to give an answer as to how you can recognize a person out of 1,000 people, but you can give an answer if somebody asks you a question that you do know the answer to. Like, I don't know, I can't think of an example off the top, but you know what I'm talking about. There's a million things that you can answer questions to, right? If you ask Elliot some question about music or something like that, then he's going to be able to rattle off an answer, and he may even spend like an hour answering this question because he has clearly thought about this and he's figured out how he would answer that question. He's got all these ideas in his mind that are articulated, okay? So there is a distinction to be made between things which can be articulated and things that can't. Okay? I'm going to skip. No, I'm going to go. I'm going to come back to this articulated beliefs when I get down to commitment and correction. Let me talk about actions and words. Okay. So this one is interesting because there's a sense in which what we articulate is not always, usually it is, but it is not always equivalent to what we actually believe inside of us, our tacit knowledge, okay? So somebody may ask us a question about, the value of money. Do you value money, right? Is that really important to you? How important is that to you? I don't care about money. Money. I'm for the big important things. And you go home that night and your wife says, oh, I bought this big expensive thing that I've wanted all this time. What? What are you talking about? How could you? We don't have enough money for that, right? So when something happens and the actions sometimes will expose what our tacit beliefs actually are. And it's not unusual for us to have things that we say that are not really what we believe. And I think this one's interesting because I think this gets to the heart of what it means in some sense to be a believer, I think. Because a believer is somebody who has tacitly or has the commands of God written on their heart. It is a tacit part of them. It is something that is internalized in such a way that when something comes up, they act in a way that a believer would act. Not that they don't make mistakes and stuff, but if you are somebody who says, do you believe in Jesus? And they say, yes, I believe in Jesus. But then when the rubber hits the road and they are confronted with a situation where if you believe Jesus, then you would act in this way. But if you didn't believe in Jesus, you would act in a different way. Then sometimes if you don't really believe in Jesus, you just say you do. That's the way it would become exposed to you, that you would find out for yourself. In fact, I don't actually believe what I say I believe, that kind of a thing. And it seems to me like belief is something having to do, belief in God and salvation is something having to do with who we are inside. Not that we don't make mistakes, we do, obviously. Communication. This one's also interesting. All these are interesting. I don't know. I love this subject. I don't know why. It's just a really interesting subject. When two people are talking or writing and reading and stuff like that, person A has inside of them this enormous structure of tacit knowledge and beliefs and ideas and thoughts and language and everything else. And person B also has this huge, enormous backlog of information and stuff like that. And now we have to communicate. This person has some idea that they want to communicate with this person. If they share really similar sets of beliefs and tacit knowledge, then it's really easy to communicate. Very few symbols are necessary in order for that information to be communicated because they share the same sorts of things. They share the same language. Maybe they share a lot of experiences. They share a lot of beliefs and fundamental expectations and stuff like that. If they share a lot of stuff, then it doesn't take... So old married couples can say a few words and communicate a huge amount of information, but two teenage lovers who are just getting together and don't know each other can say words and totally miscommunicate. Say a lot more words and totally miscommunicate. It's because there's a lack of sharing of information and experience and all that kind of stuff like that. And so it seems to me like in order for communication to work, the more shared tacit knowledge that you have, the more the internal structures are the same, the easier the communication gets, in my opinion. Commitment. We are, for better or worse, committed to those pieces of tacit knowledge that we have inside us. We believe them. We are committed to them. We're not willing to just sort of immediately throw them away. And that's a good thing, too, because otherwise we'd be waffling around all the time, right? And if something comes up that doesn't agree with our system or our beliefs or something like that, then all of a sudden we have to go, oh, that didn't work. or I don't like that, or there's something that goes on there that if something comes up that you don't believe that somebody is saying, that it's not the case that we hold all of our beliefs and our tacit knowledge without any commitment at all. It's not like, oh, at the drop of a hat, I'll change my mind. In fact, it's kind of like, I think it's a little bit like, suppose somebody learns a really bad practice in soccer. Somebody has told them, every time you kick the ball, you should kick it with your toe. Okay? That's a bad idea. I'm just telling you, straight up. That's a bad idea. But let's suppose somebody has been taught that way. They've been playing that way for 3 or 4 years. They've been kicking it with their toe. Somebody comes along and says, that's not the right way to kick it. You're supposed to kick it with the inside of your foot. You'll have more control. The ball will go where you want to, blah, blah, blah. And they go, oh, okay, I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to kick it with my foot now, with the inside of my foot. Is that going to work? No, it's not going to work. They're going to have to practice. They're going to have to relearn the new idea. And they're going to so it's going to be a process of changing their mind. And I think that most of our information or the things that we have inside us that we are committed to, you can't just change it on a turn of a dime. I mean, some of these things maybe you can change your mind, and they're less difficult to change. But there's a lot of them that takes a lot of work to relearn and retrain yourself to have new knowledge, because we're sort of committed to it. And correction. You might think that correction is sort of impossible. It's just sort of in us. We're committed to it. It's part of us. We use it all the time. How would we ever get corrected? Well, it seems to me like you can have correction if something comes up that you see or hear that doesn't fit into your system. If it's not articulable, it's really going to be hard to correct. If you can't speak it outside, if you can't speak it out loud, if it's just embedded in you and it's just thoughts, it's going to be very, very hard to change, okay? But if you can say it, if you can articulate it, and you can take it outside of you and look at it and examine it and try and figure out what's right and what's wrong about it and analyze it and all that kind of stuff like that, then there's the possibility of correcting it and then reviewing and having new beliefs and new structures and new ways of thinking about things. But I think that the process of articulation is really important for analyzing our own internal framework, our own internal tacit knowledge, in order to think about things that way. Hope that made sense. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to give you time for questions at the end. I went through that really fast. That's a lot of Polanyi in a big hurry. So you guys are going to have time at the end, hopefully, to talk about this. Conclusion. Fortunately, we're at the conclusion, so I'm almost done rattling on. But here's what I want to basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these main themes that I said at the very beginning, and I'm going to approach them from this perspective that I've given you about the nature of knowledge and how we have it embedded in us. Thinking without tacit knowledge is impossible. Therefore, all knowledge is fundamentally subjective. Now, let me be careful when I say that, because I know that sounds like all knowledge is fundamentally relative. That's not what I mean. What I mean is all knowledge is in us. We have knowledge. We can write down on a piece of paper 2 + 2 = 4. That's just scribbles on a page. 2 + 2 = 4 is knowledge that I have. It is internal to me. It is subjective to me. Now, we can write it down on a page and we can communicate it with each other, and we can say that this is knowledge that everybody should have and everybody can have and all that kind of stuff like that. But any knowledge that we actually have is subjective to us. It is our knowledge. That doesn't mean that it isn't right or wrong or true or false. It just means that when we have knowledge, it is our knowledge. I mean, the paper doesn't have knowledge. I have knowledge. I guess that's all I'm saying. It's a very simple thing, but those words sometimes spark in us, ideas that I'm not intending. So to take all this information that I've said, and I now let's think about psychologists and philosophers and how they are going to make decisions about what is human nature and who are we and what's moral and all that kind of stuff. They're going to have a set of assumptions. They are going to have a tacit knowledge. And where's that coming from? That's coming from their upbringing, from their childhood, from their education. A lot of it is coming from their education, especially maybe their undergraduate or graduate education. It's coming from their peers. It's coming from their friends. It's coming from the books that they have read. It's coming from the research that they have done. It's coming from their own personal reflection on all these questions. And And all of that stuff has been embedded in them and it has become part of who they are. And it is going to be the structure and the framework through which they are going to interpret all information, everything that's coming at them, okay? And they are going to, so they are in some sense, they're in the same boat. Both the philosopher and the psychologist, the scientist and the humanist are going to be the same, all right? What the scientific objectivity, now this is the piece, so in some sense everything is purely subjective, but we do talk about scientific objectivity. What do we mean by that? Okay, what I think we mean by that is that the controversial assumptions, okay, ones that people are going to doubt, there are certain assumptions that we are not sure of. Those are the ones that the scientist is supposed to keep outside of them and not influence the decisions that they make. They're supposed to not influence the conclusions that they make. Those specific conclusions or controversial assumptions are supposed to not be things that the scientist is using. Like they're not supposed to use they think it's their favorite theory or they believe it's their favorite theory. So that's a controversial assumption about that particular theory. And so you're not supposed to bring that controversial assumption to play when you are looking at your data and making conclusions and stuff like that. And I think to some extent people can do that. I mean, you don't always succeed at that. I mean, everybody has failures in that area. So there is a sense, in that sense, we can talk about scientific objectivity, but in another more profound sense, there's no way they can do their science without assumptions about what science is, what the method is, what data is, how it works, how statistics work, how everything works, right? So, I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense. Okay. So, what about empirical data? That was a question that I wrote at the bottom of the last slide. You might think that, well, if we use empirical data, then that is... Oh, sorry about that. There's my backup. Look at that. It worked. Okay. So you might think that if we use empirical data, then we can do all these tests, and that is going to give us so much information, and the information is going to be so good, we're going to know for sure whether this thing is true or whether it's not true because we've taken data. Whereas the philosopher, I mean, how many experiments is a philosopher going to do? They're not going to be able to take data. So it seems to me like one of the ways to think about this is that the kinds of questions that are being answered and asked with data are different than the kinds of questions that are going to be asked and answered with regard to these big significant questions about humanity and stuff like that. I would suggest that there are simple questions and complex questions, and the kinds of questions that can be answered with experiments and data in physics, in psychology and biology, whatever, especially in physics, they seem really hard because physicists, some of them are smart and stuff, and they can do all the science and stuff like that, and they should be able to know how to do all this stuff. So you would think that it's really hard and really complex, but in fact, if you can eliminate all the other variables, that's what they're trying to do. You eliminate all these variables, and so all you've narrowed this experiment down to, we're only looking at one single variable, and that is in some sense a simple question. What does it mean that people answer the trolley car question the way they answer it? That is not a simple question. That is not something that you can remove all of the variables for and answer with data or something like that. That's an incredibly complex question, and the only way you're going to answer that is by thinking philosophically or theologically or humanistically or bringing in all this different kinds of information. That's much more complex, it seems to me. That's my opinion anyway. What percentage of the people will administer lethal shock? Oh, look at how I spelled that. Shock. How many people? That's a question that can be answered. Now, I don't know. I'm sure that people who are doing science, physicists and stuff, and psychologists and everybody else who's they're actually asking more complex questions than these simple ones. I no doubt that they are asking much more complex. But it seems to me like the kinds of things that you can answer with data are simpler in general than these very complex humanistic questions that require a great deal of thought. That's my perspective. I think that data from psychology can provide us with clues to draw abductive conclusions about complex problems. There's lots of information that we can get from psychology. It's extremely helpful. We do the lethal shock experiment. That gives us new information about who we are as human beings that will help us think about the bigger questions. And there's lots of really, really good kinds of experiments that they do and data that they can do and things like that. So I think that there's great value in that kind of stuff. And they can provide lots of clues. The philosopher is looking out at everyday activity and common phenomena that they can experience and stuff. The psychologist is looking at more detailed stuff, and that's more information that you can get that you wouldn't get just by looking at everyday life and experience and stuff like that. Okay, so final conclusion. When it comes to the big questions, we are all in the same boat, is what I would say. That there's no royal road to answering these things, that we're going to have to do the hard work of thinking about the framework that we have and abductively taking in clues and how do we think about the Bible? How do we think about behavior? What about people who are waging war and raping and torturing? And what are we going to think about people who administer these lethal shocks? And how are we going to think about this, that, and the other? All these pieces, they all have to fit together. And then we have to ask ourselves, what is a man? What is the nature of man? What is man's purpose? What is going to be good for him? What is going, all those sorts of things. Those are very, very, very complex questions. And it seems to me like although the philosopher, the psychologist, and the theologian can all give us new information, better information, clues, to bring it all together into a single piece is a complex process and a difficult process. And we are all in the same boat. Okay. All right. So this is the time when you guys get to ask questions. However, hopefully, just don't ask any big questions. Oh, yeah. That's not fair. Okay, so anyway, I know I spewed a huge amount of information, and you guys, I'm sure that I said all kinds of things that were crazy, so you guys can ask questions and tell me what I got wrong. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask? A lot of questions here, Jonathan. Can we get yeah. Here you go. Thanks.
My original question, I'm not interested in right now. It's that trolley question and the shock. I'd like to know what you would do in that situation. But what I was thinking about when you were talking is, well, with the trolley, I was thinking, all life is human. But then it got to the point where I'm thinking, the trolley, I wouldn't really have that much control over. It would be a more spontaneous decision. But with the inflicting of the shock, it would be much more intentional.
Yes.
And then I'd have to think, what would influence my decision? Maybe I didn't like the way he screamed, or maybe I didn't like what he wore, or the way he parted his hair, or maybe I didn't like the way he looked at me. So then I'd really have to ask myself, it just went on and on from there. Mm-hmm. So my motives for doing certain things would be very unclear at the time.
I agree. I think those are really complex things. I think the things that I could say with regard to some of that stuff is that I think the fact that the experiment came out the way they did indicates that our articulated knowledge about what we believe is not always in keeping with what we actually believe on the inside, or that what we, our actions and our words may be different. Everybody's going to say, no, I would not administer a lethal shock, but 65% people did. So sometimes it's situations like that where we have this belief about ourselves. We always have these beliefs. I'm a good guy. I'm not going to do that kind of stuff. I would never administer. I wouldn't even begin on that process, is what I tell myself. I don't know. I hope not. I hope to God that I would not be the person that would go and start administering shocks in an experiment, or that somebody could convince me to do something like that because I value people and I wouldn't want to cause harm, no matter how much information that they might get from that kind of thing. But I think that it is somewhat sobering that so many people participated and that so many people administered that shock. Nancy, did you want to say something about that?
Well, and the other piece I think that's really interesting about that is it also doesn't account for, or what's not counted, I guess, in the 65% is how many of those people didn't actually figure out what was going on until after they administered the lethal shock.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I think that's kind of what we do.
Yeah.
Like, we don't figure it out in time.
Right.
You know?
That's a good point. That's a really
to
good
like
point.
make a decision.
That's a really good
or,
point.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Paula. Thank
So
you.
in the Milgram experiments, the deciding factor was that it was a study of obedience.
Yes, right.
And these persons were told that this is how the experiment had to work.
Yeah.
And when they hesitated, there was a person in a white lab coat, no authority whatsoever, but presumed authority, and they said, you have to continue.
Yes.
So they did.
Yes.
I mean, they were following orders, and when
Mhm.
they were asked, why did you do what you did, that was their answer. Well, I was told to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the impetus for the experiment was post World War II. How did the Nazis follow these orders in such a way? And how are we supposed to think about who we are? And are we going to is the impulse to follow orders stronger than the impulse to not hurt somebody, for instance? I don't know. That's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing to find out about human nature, and I think those are important little pieces of information that we can use in thinking about what is a human and how do we work and what's important, stuff like that.
I have one more quick
Sure,
question.
absolutely.
Several months ago, I was visiting somebody, and I happened to use the word off. Now, I could say I have an off day, or, that's an off color, but I wouldn't use that word. But to me, when I have a feeling of being off, I know exactly what that feeling is.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked me to explain it.
Uh-huh.
I have spent months trying to articulate what that particular off feeling is.
Yeah.
I don't think I've never thought so much about articulating a feeling until I was asked that question. And my question is, why can I not articulate that feeling of being off the way I understand that feeling?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, sometimes we have a hard time articulating things because they are fundamentally inarticulable. I think that there's some things that are just inarticulable. Sometimes we have a hard time articulating things because we just haven't gained the vocabulary and the set of concepts that would be necessary in order to be able to articulate things. I think a lot of times the creation of new concepts in order to be able to articulate ideas is half the battle in discovering things and figuring stuff out, is just to be able to put words down. Like when Newton basically talked about the law of inertia. We've created a word, inertia, and all of a sudden we had a concept. Now we can talk about it. Whereas in the past we couldn't talk about it because we just didn't have the conceptual vocabulary to talk about it. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that kind of stuff, so I can't say why you can't articulate it. It could be that it's inarticulable. I don't know. Or it could be that maybe you could benefit from help from somebody who had a conceptual vocabulary that would allow you to then articulate. I don't know. That's not something. I'm not very good at that. Maybe Nancy can help with that question better than I can. That's not my expertise.
Well, I just was going to make a comment that I think that, a lot of what happens, you said you're not really talking about therapy tonight, and I appreciate that, but the thing that happens a lot is helping put words to things that
Yes.
people are experiencing, and
Yes.
that turns out to be extremely helpful
Yes.
and validating. But there are times when there are no words. And so part of the work then is to just be with that feeling, or to feel that feeling. And it's always interesting to me because we are, I think what you said, I forget the words you used, but we want to figure things out. We
Yes,
have an
we're
innate
looking for
sense
coherence
of
and
coherence
order.
and order. And so those kind of feelings are real, that are inarticulate, are uncomfortable sometimes too. And it's like we don't want to stay with them, but it turns out to be really helpful to stay with them and to learn about deeper experience. And I think that's where some of those bigger questions end up being answered.
Right.
Is even in the experience of not being able to articulate something. I don't know, does that make any sense? in a weird way.
Yeah, kind of does make some sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of a mix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions? Jonathan has one over there. Just as an aside, I forgot to say this. I wanted to say this. I think it's really interesting. I came to this whole theory and understanding of what knowledge is and tacit knowledge by doing math and science and reading philosophers like Reid and Polanyi and people like that and thinking about it over many, many years. And then I gave a talk like this a couple of years ago, and Larry Barber comes up to me and he says afterwards, he says, that's just what the psychologists have come up with in terms of how knowledge works. I was like, oh yeah! All right, we came up with the same answer from two different sides. That sounds awesome. Go psychology. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Honestly, this is interesting because you kind of, I honestly, that lecture was so beautiful. I almost cried in the middle of it. I'm not even kidding. I love Polanyi. I have been constantly thinking about articulation. In fact, I've had discussions with my friends over who is better at articulating their own inner worlds, and we kind of just discuss this, and we try to gauge each other on who is better at articulating certain ideas, and we go at it from, this is what I do, I introduce like social science to my friends, and I get them all interested and get them all involved in analyzing each other for more than just, just bringing each other down, but just really trying to figure each other out. And there is a sense in which I've noticed, like, there's kind of an extreme cultural backlash against the idea of articulating the inarticulate to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a sense in which it seems like simultaneously there's the need to categorize human emotions and experience and disorders or suffering. There's a need to categorize it in order to understand it and to socially communicate about it. And yet there's also this resistance, I think in people who have gone through a lot of suffering against that categorization. So it's this interesting dynamic. And what's really funny, Chris? What you talked about, the popularity boom in psychology, it's amazing how many of my friends that I've talked to that say, oh yeah, I thought about being a counselor once, but because of some reason I didn't go through with it. Or my friends that majored in psych at one point and then decided to not follow through with it. But then there's those people I meet that are just like really passionate about it. And I can kind of just sense it in their behavior, and then I can just talk to them about why they're passionate about it. And I really don't know anything, or maybe I do. I probably have tacit knowledge or something I don't know about. But it's just, I think it's beautiful what's occurring. And at the same time, it's kind of scary because, like you said, what they're doing with the humanities, at least from your perspective, and I think I'd have a similar approach, that they're really trying to defang what's been said to a certain degree. They're trying to remove the biggest questions by maybe answering the small questions, but that's maybe a different matter.
Well, I mean, for a long time, I would say there's two competing streams of thought in our culture with regard to sort of science and how science is going to answer questions and things like that. On the one hand, I think you captured both of them. On the one hand, there is the stream that says that science is the way that you answer questions, and they have the validity to answer the questions. And so when it comes to the answers of, say, Aristotle or Plato and cognitive psychologists, the cognitive psychologists, because they're using science, they're going to have the right answers, that kind of a thing. At the same time, there's another stream that is sort of the anti-enlightenment stream. I don't know if you want to call it that, but it's the stream that says, all those guys that are using their minds and brains and talking about things in very logical ways and mathematical and scientific ways, they're missing something very significant about the human experience. And they are trying to categorize it and put it into little neat boxes, and it doesn't fit in neat boxes. And we can't really know that stuff the way that they want to know it. And so we're sort of rebelling against that whole scientific knowledge stuff, right? I think both of those streams are alive and well in our society, and it depends on which day and what topic you're asking that you'll see both of those same streams, even in the same person a lot of times.
And the same Gutenberg class.
Even in the same Gutenberg class. Even in the same Gutenberg class, believe it or not. All right, any last questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your attention.